Welcome to the Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thanks for being with us on your Monday. If you're experiencing an emergency, maybe a house fire, and you call the fire department, you probably expect a team to show up pretty quickly with the proper equipment and be trained to handle said emergency. But because of how Ohio's fire departments are set up, that might not always be the case. And that's not due to any fault of the hardworking volunteers staffing those fire departments. That's right, I said volunteers. According to a report from the state fire marshal, around 70% of the state's firefighting departments are at least partially staffed with volunteers, and they are facing some significant challenges. Today, IdeaStream launches its Sound the Alarm project, digging into the difficulties faced by volunteer firefighters. You'll hear stories on Today from the Ohio Newsroom all week long here on WKSU, and you can check out extended version from our reporters online at ideastream.org. Then later in the show today, we'll learn how Ohio is failing in efforts to protect children from sex trafficking and what activists hope to do about that. But first, with me now in studio to talk more about the Sound the Alarm project is IdeaStream Public Media's reporter Abigail Botar. Abigail, thanks for being here.
Of course, good morning.
And we have Kendall Crawford also joining us. She's a reporter for Today from the Ohio Newsroom, calling in. Kendall, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Now, if you would like to join the conversation, you can do that by giving us a call. The number to do that is 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org or send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Kendall, I want to start this conversation by rewinding back to 2022. That's when Ohio Governor Mike DeWine established the Volunteer Fire Service Task Force. And that really kind of sets up the problem that we're talking about here today. So tell us about the task force and the information that came out of that.
Yeah, so the task force was kind of brought on because for years, volunteer firefighters had been noticing that their recruitments were shrinking. They talked about their funding being stretched tighter and response times not meeting the demands of their community. And Ohio State Fire Marshal Kevin Reardon actually heard from a small department about all these struggles that they're facing. And as he was kind of driving home from that visit with them, he thought about how when he was a volunteer firefighter in the 1970s, how similar it was or how things have just gotten worse. So in that, half a decade, not much had changed to support volunteer firefighters. So Governor DeWine forms the task force, like you said, in 2022. They hold these listening sessions, they do surveys, and their findings are that volunteer departments, in many instances, are just kind of hanging on by a thread. They don't have the support they need to meet demands that are going up in communities. And then you have East Palestine happen. Volunteer firefighters in that circumstance were the first on the scene. And they're putting themselves in this very dangerous situation with no expectation of a paycheck. And when you stop to think about it, that's really amazing. And it's something that Stephanie Chekalinsky, a former editor here at IdeaStream, pointed out to our team of reporters. So we started digging in, getting the data, and talking to as many firefighters as we possibly could from every region in the state. And for the last year, we've spent time with those first responders and their families, trying to understand these challenges and the road ahead for them.
And you mentioned East Palestine there, Kendall. That was a train derailment, a major train derailment that happened 3 years ago here in Northeast Ohio, and toxic chemicals spilled from a train in East Palestine. Abigail, talk to us more about the response in East Palestine and how that impacted volunteer firefighters who were on the scene for that derailment.
Yeah, this is basically the most extreme event that we are asking volunteer firefighters to respond to. And the first person on the scene of this derailment and chemical spill was a volunteer firefighter. The only paid firefighter in East Palestine is the fire chief Keith Drabick, who was out of town that weekend, quickly came back because of that. And because of gaps in training and the way the rail system works, the volunteer firefighters first on the scene had no idea what they were walking into. They had no idea what chemicals were spilled, what an appropriate response would be. The basic volunteer certification that volunteer firefighters can start responding to emergencies with is 36 hours, and it doesn't include any hazmat training that would have helped them in that situation. The fire chief, Keith Drabick, said it was a miracle no one got hurt. The state fire marshal, Kevin Reardon, said that it was honestly just pure luck that worked out so well, that instincts kicked in and they made the right decisions because they weren't set up to be able to respond to that correctly. So it's kind of a miracle that it turned out so well.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the equipment that those volunteer firefighters were using in East Palestine, where did that equipment come from?
So I'm not sure exactly in East Palestine. Oftentimes, even if it's a volunteer department, the village or the township is still able to provide at least a little bit of funding for equipment. It may be not as up to date as what we'd see in a major city. There's also grants that departments can apply for through the state fire marshal's office. But we definitely know that there's departments specifically in very rural Southeast Ohio where volunteer firefighters themselves are asked to bring their own equipment to work. So yeah, they're going in for a job that they're not paid for, and they're asked to bring in their own equipment to go put their lives on the line for their community.
Kendall, years ago, like I'm talking in the 1800s, years ago, Ohio's first professional paid fire department came into being in Cincinnati. So how did the wing then get to the point where the state is being covered so much by volunteer firefighters today?
Yeah, like you mentioned. I mean, we changed towards paid professional departments in the 1800s. Before that, communities were protected by community bucket brigades. They were just these small groups that had like no affiliation like they do today with local governments. So they relied just on insurance money to keep their departments running. And these volunteers would actually fight, fist fights and brawls to put out the blazes so that they could be the department to say that they can collect the insurance paycheck. It was the only way they were able to keep going. So that model doesn't seem to be working, especially because in Cincinnati, there's an instance where 10 departments are so busy arguing that they just let a mill burn to the ground. So Cincinnati leads the reform, and in 1853, they moved to a paid department. And many communities in Ohio and across the country follow suit. But it's still expensive, and not everyone can afford to, especially when we're talking about these small communities, these in rural areas that don't have a very big tax base. And so as you see that transition happen, you see the major cities like Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland, we all have paid departments because we have the population and the tax base to support it. But nearly 3/4 of Ohio's fire departments are still volunteer today, and hopefully are not brawling the same way that they used to be. But they're using a model that's rooted in the past, in centuries old.
Now, this is a series, the Sound the Alarm series, that just launched today, and it will be published all week long on WKSU, also on ideastream.org. Abigail, you had a story that went live today that deals with this, so can you tell us just a little bit about what people can find in your story today?
Well, this was Abby Marshall's story today, so I won't take any credit for it, but it's a really great, it kind of talks about what Kendall mentioned about kind of how paid firefighting is rooted in Ohio, because everything is from Ohio somewhere or another, and talks through, kind of sets us up with the task force report. And then Kendall and I have stories. Tomorrow you'll hear Kendall's story about funding and budgets, which is fascinating, and it kind of plays out the rest of the week. So you have some good ones to look forward to the rest of the week.
We will definitely be paying attention all week long. And let's talk about some of the issues that fire departments are dealing with right now. Abigail, the average age of a volunteer firefighter in Ohio, for example. Tell us what you found about that.
Yeah, so the task force report that came out in 2023, they found that the average age of volunteer firefighters is 54, which a lot of paid firefighters can retire at 55. So that's a really big difference. And Kendall and I both spoke with dozens of volunteer firefighters from across the state. And one of the through lines here is that there's a dying culture of volunteerism that used to power these departments forward. And it's causing these older firefighters who maybe would have retired a couple decades ago to continue responding to calls well past that retirement age. The number of active volunteer certifications has decreased nearly 15% since January 2020. So with no one coming up behind them, a lot of older volunteers are worried that if they stop, no one will respond to their community's emergencies, and this volunteer model will die out completely.
I want to let our audience know that we had expected to hear from Chief Michael Lalini today from the village of Tiltonsville. This is just on the other side of West Virginia here in Ohio. Unfortunately, he did let us know that he was just called out on a call.
Yes.
So those are the kind of things that you deal with in these small fire departments where it really is all hands on deck and you're just hoping the first person can get there as quickly as they possibly can. We talk about the financial and funding challenges that departments are facing. Kendall, can you bring us up to speed on what you found regarding that?
Yeah, so basically, every volunteer fire department has a different budget. And like I mentioned before, that's determined by community support. So they're operating on money from levies. And that means two fire departments can be living in two drastically different realities. So if you look at a wealthier community with a larger tax base, Gates Mills, which is a suburb of Cleveland, is actually the department that we talk to, and they have about $400,000 a year to pay for their equipment, to pay for personnel, training, insurance, fuel, everything, just keeping the lights on, all that. So $400,000. But then you go to Southeast Ohio, to a rural department. Bell Valley is where I went and visited, and they have a lot less. They run on $58,000.
Wow.
And that's less than the average annual wage in the US. And that department is expected to cover hundreds of square miles. They actually have a higher average call rate than Gates Mills does. So it's not like they're not using their equipment or not going out on runs. They are putting a lot of miles on their fire engine.
And what did
And on
you
top-
find, Kendall, in terms of what people are doing to try in a place like that where you visited to make up that difference and try and make that money?
Yeah, it's really, really difficult. They have to take shortcuts a little bit. I mean, their fire engine there was over 20 years old. It's aging. And the fire chief, Ed McKee, talked with me about how they don't know how they're going to buy a new one or replace it, even though they're supposed to in the next couple of years. It's around $1 million now for a fire engine. And so, I mean, if you think of his budget yearly, the math doesn't really work out. A lot of these departments, they rely on grants to try to fill those gaps. But when you have, 70% of Ohio's volunteer departments all competing for these same grants, it does make it really difficult to be awarded what you need, not just for equipment, but for, a fire engine. And so they in the past have, like, their former tanker that they got is it was just like a truck that they rescued from a stone quarry and like outfitted with a water tank. And that was the way that they were able to, like, for I think 10 years they said they ran it, operate was by a donation. So they really do rely on their community to donate fuel to heat their building. And sometimes they hire a grant writer because they're like, well, if we miss out on a grant, we won't be able to operate at all. So we're going to put some money into making sure that comes through.
The idea of something like a pancake breakfast to meet your local firefighters might sound charming, a little less charming maybe when you're depending on those pancakes in order to actually be able to care for the people in your community.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to know that your annual fundraiser or your 2 times a year fundraiser is going to make it or break it for your department.
And one of the other big differences between like a department like Gates Mills and Bell Valley in Southeast Ohio is Gates Mills is surrounded by fully paid departments. They have Mayfield. They have those other suburbs of Cleveland that have fully paid departments. So they can kind of rely on the mutual aid of those departments to help them respond to fires and to emergencies in town. But in Bell Valley, they're the only department for miles. So that if they're not responding, no one is.
We did just get word that Chief Lalini is able to join us, so we would like to welcome him to the show now. Welcome, Chief Lalini. Thank you for being able to make time with us today. I think he'll be with us momentarily. He's connecting now. So while we wait for him to connect, I think we'll have him in just a moment. Abigail, I'll ask you about response times and what you found in your reporting.
Yeah, so we ran a data analysis on response times, comparing volunteer departments, paid part-time departments, and fully paid departments. And on average, volunteer departments' response times are more than 2 minutes longer than full-time paid departments. That's often because volunteer departments cover these sprawling rural communities, like we talked about in Bell Valley, for example. It just takes a longer time to travel the distance to emergencies. But I think a lot of us, when we think about firefighters, we think about people kind of being on call there, spending the night at the fire department so they can quickly respond to a fire or to an emergency. But with these volunteer departments, they're relying on people not at the department. They have to get out of bed in the middle of the night, drive to the fire station, get on an engine, and then drive out to the scene, which adds precious minutes to their response times. And we've seen some sort of societal shifts in the past few decades that have also kind of made the volunteer system not work so well, because there are a lot less people working in the community that they live in. So it used to be that farmers would be able to kind of stop what they were doing and respond to a fire pretty quickly, but now most of us don't work in our town. So it's people leaving their full-time jobs, driving back home to the fire station, hopping on the engine and then going out. So it just takes longer. And, we've heard from departments that their response times can be up to an hour for an ambulance to show up to the scene of a medical emergency.
That's definitely not necessarily comforting in that situation. And you actually talked with State Fire Marshal Kevin Reardon, from what I understand. We have a clip that we can hear from that interview, so let's go ahead and hear that clip.
They do their best at it, but that's just not ideal at all, because by the time they get to a structure, the only fire to put out is what's left of whatever's fallen by then. They're not going to make any saves. With a 10-minute response time, you're not going to save anything or anybody. You're just not. You're not even going to save the mailbox. It's bad.
Yeah, and that's, no fault of volunteers themselves. There's really no safety net for them. Like, they could potentially lose their jobs if they leave so often for this, volunteer position, but there's just such a dedication to keeping their communities safe. And it's, they really think of it less like a job and more like part of who they are innately, and which also makes it hard to kind of put that down and potentially retire from it.
Mm-hmm. We have Chief Lalini with us now, so let's hear from the Chief now. Chief, thank you very much for making time to be with us. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And we understand you had a bit of a call just a moment ago, but we're glad you were able to make the time. So we'd like you now, can you tell us a little bit about Tiltonsville and how the department serves the town, and just describe it for people who may not be familiar, on the Ohio River, a bit north of Wheeling, West Virginia?
Yeah, so Tiltonsville, Ohio is located in southern Jefferson County, right on the Belmont County border. We're practically right across from Wheeling, West Virginia, just a little bit more north. Small town community, around 1,200-ish people on a population basis. Most of it is all residential area, with part of it being commercial as well.
And is your fire department staffed completely by volunteers, partially by volunteers? What does that look like for you, Chief Lalini?
So right now we are a combination department. So we have part-time paid personnel, but we also supplement with volunteers as well.
And you, as I understand it, are operating a joint fire district with two other municipalities. Can you tell us about that?
So we're part of a joint fire district called Buckeye Joint Fire District. It's a collaborative effort between Tiltonsville Fire Department, Rayland Fire Department, Tiltonsville and Rayland Village Councils, and the Warren Township Trustees. It was a district that was created in 2023, 2024, in order to help supplement the volunteers that we did not have, in order to get our vehicles out for responses, especially EMS, which is our bread and butter. Response times were going through the roof, in excess of 45 minutes for an ambulance to arrive, and we knew we couldn't operate much longer like this. So the departments got together with the political entities and formed a district, passed a levy that allowed us to employ staffing.
Can you tell us about a typical day for your staff and also your volunteer firefighter and what that might look like?
So right now, the way it operates is Tiltonville Fire Department, Rayla Fire Department operate on a 12 on, 12 off rotation. We split the coverage, daylight and night. So right now we do an 8-8-8P, and then Rayla Fire Department will do an 8P to 8A, and then at some point we will rotate those shifts. So each of us works days and nights eventually. Typical day is it's staffed by 2 personnel per station per shift. A typical day will consist of just morning checks, daily chores, checking equipment, making sure the station's clean, the apparatus are ready to go. Any paperwork needs to be completed gets completed. Any training that we come up with can get done by the duty crews. And basically it's just waiting and answering calls as they come in.
Now, the ability for you to create this joint fire district, that was not a certainty. The people in your area and the joining municipalities had to vote on this. We're talking about the challenges facing fire departments, particularly those that are primarily using volunteers. Do you have any idea what might have happened if this hadn't been approved by the voters? This was a property tax levy in order to create the joint fire district?
So the main reason why we went through with this was because our response times were through the roof. Wayland Fire Department at the time was not operating EMS, so therefore we were covering a large area with our ambulance in addition to mutual aid that we were relying on. As time went on, the number of volunteers became less and less, which led to our squads not getting out for calls a lot, which increased our response times multiple times. And as time went on, it became worse and worse. Like I said, there was times where the responses would be anywhere from 45 minutes and above for someone waiting for an ambulance.
Oh my gosh.
And we knew we couldn't function that way any longer, and we knew something had to be done quickly. So several of us got together, formed a committee to figure out how to combat this. We decided to attempt to create a district and get a levy passed that would help us fund staffing. Challenges we came across, we also had to get our political entities involved. We performed town hall meetings, going door to door, just speaking with the residents multiple occasions, just to get the word out on why we were doing this. So we wanted to hit this pretty hard and get it passed on the first try. And the basis behind it was simply to lower the response times. People call 911, they expect an ambulance to show up within minutes and not, within an hour. It was getting to the point where we would have to rely on mutual aid quite a bit to answer our calls, which means they were leaving their area to come down and answer our runs. And we knew that wasn't acceptable, especially when they would rely on us to help them out and we couldn't fulfill the obligation. So to reduce the response times, get our vehicles out the door, we had to resort to going to the taxpayers and ask them to approve a levy for us to fund staffing. A lot of work was put in over the course of at least 2 years. Multiple people were involved. There was a lot of talking to the community to get our point across. And, the community has always backed us on whatever we try to do, and they definitely backed us on this.
Chief Lolini, I want to thank you so much for sharing your perspective actually out in the field and this model, this joint district model, which is something that I think we're seeing more of here in the state of Ohio. We won't take up any more of your time. We know you had a call already, so thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Thank you. And like I said, in addition to community, I can't thank the guys in our departments as well. They've been great to work with. They do their job, and they've stepped up to make sure that we get this mission accomplished and continue to carry out our mission daily. And if it wasn't for them, our department would not exist. If it wasn't for our communities, our departments would not exist. So my heartfelt thanks goes out to all of them.
Thank you so much, Chief Lolini.
Thank you.
Kendall, you were able to connect with some folks on a really personal level throughout these stories. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually, in one of the places that I went in Tiltonsville, where Michael Lolini is from, I talked with Peg Dugan. She's a volunteer firefighter in that area, and she met her husband, Doug Dugan, who is the chief of the department, before Michael Lolini on the job together. They lived across the street from the firehouse. They had their wedding reception at the firehouse, and they raised kids who followed in their footsteps and went into the fire service. But in June of 2021, Doug was called to respond to a boat fire, and before he could get there, he suffered a pulmonary embolism, Peg Dugan was actually called in to try to save him. And so she rushed over with her grandson, Owen, who was 9 years old at the time, and told me about that moment in the ambulance together with Doug, which ended up being their last. She went back to volunteer firefighting for Tiltonsville. She still does today. She has been diagnosed with breast cancer. She was 2 years ago. She is getting older. She doesn't have her husband, Doug, on the force with her anymore. And she described that as her comfort. And so, but still, even, with Tiltonsville Joint Fire District that has helped, she still feels that like calling and that pride to serve her community. She knew it was too important to stop doing.
We have a little bit of your conversation with Peg, so let's hear that now.
I only took a week off. Are you ready to go back when you lose your husband after a week? Absolutely not. But, like I said, God created me pretty tough, so I always try to just muddle on through. I've had breast cancer since then. There's been a lot of things that have happened since then, so, you just muddle on through and try to do what you can.
That just speaks to the toughness of the people that we were asking to do some of the most difficult jobs with the least amount of training. We only have about 30 seconds here. This is a week-long series. Obviously, we are just scratching the surface. Abigail, tell us very quickly about the difference in training.
Yes, so volunteer firefighters can start responding to these emergencies with just 36 hours of training compared to a paid full-time firefighter would be required to get 240 hours. And obviously, same emergencies they're responding to. And that's a story you'll hear on Wednesday about the differences. So I really encourage you to tune in all week. We have some great stories, some great people that we're highlighting in this series that really, show the humanity and the volunteerism, the sacrifice that these volunteer firefighters make across the state.
36 hours to more than 200 hours in training. That is quite the difference. Reporters Abigail Botar and Kendall Crawford, thank you so much for taking time to share this series with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, you can hear the Sound the Alarm stories all week here on WKSU. That's part of the Today from the Ohio Newsroom series, and you can read the stories online. Just go to ideastream.org. We'll take a quick break now, and when we come back, we'll learn why Ohio got an F when it comes to protecting children from sex trafficking and what one group hopes to do about that. This is The Sound of Ideas. I'm Stephanie Haney. We'll be right back. You're with The Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for staying with us. Shared Hope International is a nonprofit organization dedicated to ending sex trafficking. Every few years, this group grades how well each state is protecting children who have been commercially sexually exploited. In 2025, Ohio got a failing grade from Shared Hope International. This report card is based exclusively on state laws, and today we'll talk through why Ohio got 3 Fs and 1 D from Shared Hope International, and what the nonprofit organization, the Collaborative to End Human Trafficking, hopes will come from this latest analysis. We'll also hear the real-life story of a woman who survived being sex trafficked right here in Northeast Ohio, in Elyria, both as a child and as an adult. Now, I do want to warn our audience, we will be talking about what happened to her in some detail, so if that might be triggering for you, please listen with caution. Joining us now in studio, we have Kirsty Mounsey, President and CEO of the Collaborative to End Human Trafficking. Kirsty, thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us.
We also have Brittany Figler with us, the Secretary of the Survivor Advisory Council at the Collaborative to End Human Trafficking. Brittany, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, if you would like to be part of this conversation, you can give us a call at 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org or message us on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Maybe you have a question or a comment that you'd like to share with our panel. We invite you to be part of the conversation. Now, Kirsty, first we're going to walk through the Shared Hope International report card for Ohio. So I think we have that graphic. If you're watching us on the Ohio channel and the IdeaStream Public Media YouTube page, you may be able to see that report card on the screen here. So what we saw in the report card is when it comes to inclusive definitions, Ohio received a grade of F. When it comes to protection from unjust criminalization, Ohio received a grade of F. When it comes to legal relief, Shared Hope International gave Ohio the grade of F. And when it comes to survivor center supports, Shared Hope International gave Ohio the grade of D. Now, this is a nonprofit organization looking at all of the states and focusing on state laws, specifically when it comes to sex trafficking of children. So, Kirsty, I'll ask you to explain what it is you take away from that report card.
It's an important policy recommendation. So the report card really gives us guidance for us at the collaborative and our statewide partners. We see it really as a flashlight. It's a tool to look at where are we as a state relative to the federal laws that are already there. How can we move our state and our laws and our policies forward to better serve the needs of survivors? So it is broken down into 3 Ps, which is prevention, protection, and prosecution. And we see that, and we have over the years seen that we're doing pretty well in the prosecution area. Law enforcement has driven this issue. We've looked at human trafficking as a crime. But the more we have learned over the years and the more Shared Hope has shifted their priorities as well. We have a lot of work to do around prevention and protection, and that's what you see. We have we still look at minors in our state as traffickers, as perpetrators sometimes, and that needs to change. So we need to look at children as victims. The state statute makes it, the federal statute makes it very clear. No one under the age of 18 needs to prove forced fraud or coercion to be a victim of trafficking. They're automatically a victim of trafficking. A child involved in the commercial sex industry is automatically a victim, and that's what we need to change.
Brittany, as a survivor of child and adult sex trafficking, how does that report card make you feel?
To be honest, it brings up a lot of frustration. Looking at that, being 35 years old now and thinking back to when I was 15, so we're talking 20 years ago, right? I can see, on paper that looks like not much has changed. It's showing me how much work I still have to do. And it kind of ignites me. It ignites me a lot.
Can you talk to us about what happened to you when you were a child being trafficked?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was 15 years old, my parents kicked me out of home for coming out as gay. And when they kicked me out, I had nowhere to go. I came from a very broken family. At that point, I had already had a rape trial. My uncle had raped me. So my family was very split. With that being said, that left me very vulnerable and susceptible to a lot of things. One of those being a 32-year-old man who offered me a place to stay. And when I got there, he essentially groomed me, right? So he knew that I had, all these vulnerabilities, and he filled all those voids that you have as a child when you come from a home like that. Always happy to see me, didn't put his hands on me. And eventually he coaxed me into starting to sleep with these men to give him drugs. At that time, I didn't realize I was being trafficked, but that is what happened. I started being trafficked by him.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And Kirsty, how often do you hear a story like Brittany's?
We hear the story over and over again. I think what Brittany's story highlights is how human trafficking really happens and how, as a society, we have to listen to survivors to understand that human trafficking is not something that happens in isolation. It is not the Taken movie with the van of young girls being kidnapped. It is conditions that our society creates, like Brittany just beautifully described, conditions of poverty, of broken homes, of unsupported needs, of homelessness, being an LGBTQ teen. We hear that over and over again in Northeast Ohio, kids who are being kicked out, who are left vulnerable into conditions that allow exploitation to happen. So unfortunately, very unfortunately, Brittany's story is not one that we don't hear often. It is the same story over and over again.
Brittany, can you tell us a little bit more about how that particular instance of trafficking for you came to an end?
Yeah. So I was there for about 2 years. And when I was 17, somebody that my trafficker was doing interactions with wore wire on him. And our house got raided. So one day the cops showed up, and I was in nothing but a t-shirt, and he sent me downstairs because we live in an upstairs unit to go answer the door while he flushed drugs and tried to get rid of evidence. Now, when I got down there to answer the door at that point, they kicked it in right as I got to the door. They threw me to the ground. They had guns to the back of my head, and I told them immediately I was only 17. And excuse my language, but their response to me was, "We don't care, bitch. We know you're a criminal." And they took me right upstairs, had me cuffed, sat me in a living room on a couch. Now, mind you, again, I had no panties on or anything. So I'm sitting on a couch with my hands cuffed behind my back, and I am surrounded by male detectives in the room. They started going through everything, and then finally they brought him into the living room with me, and they sat him in a chair across from me. And when he looked at them, he told them, "You guys might want to ease up on her. She's only 17. Then and only then did they believe that I was only 17. So in my mind, what that communicated was, my word means nothing. That had already been, enforced in me, but to see it play out in that instance with the police, obviously I was already in the most fear I'd ever been in my life. I knew to just obey and be quiet. So they're in there, they're going through everything, and we had a bottle of liquor, and in permanent marker on the bottom, it had LSD, don't drink. That was one of the things that the police were there for. So they pick up this bottle, and as soon as they grab it, out loud, my trafficker looks at me and he says, "B, you got to tell them that's yours, that ain't mine." And I was like, "Okay, it's mine. That's my drugs. Those aren't his, that's mine." And so they pull out a test kit to test the substance to see if it comes back positive. It comes back negative, and they look at me and they say, "We're still sending this out to the lab, and if anything comes back with this, you're going to get 7 to 10 years.
Wow.
So even in front of them, he's forcing me to take charges for something that wasn't mine, and they were willing to do that. They were willing to charge me. And they took him off to jail that day, and I was fortunate enough that they did. But they didn't do anything to help me. They didn't separate us. They didn't pull me aside and say, "Hey, you're only 17. What are you doing living here with this 32-year-old man that's got a criminal record 20 pages long?" They treated me as if I was as much of a criminal as him. But I was fortunate that they did take him off to jail, but they left me there. And so I called home crying eventually, asking, could I please come home? And my parents said, yes, as long as you go back to school and graduate. And I said, okay. So I was able to move back home and get out of that situation. But a week after I got home, I found out I was pregnant. And I was pregnant by my trafficker.
Wow. And what happened from there in terms of that pregnancy?
So, at first I really battled with it because I didn't know how that was going to affect me, and more importantly, how it would affect the baby. But ultimately, I decided to keep my son, and he was the best gift that I've ever been given in my life. He's 16 years old now. He's a straight A student. He excels in everything. His father signed over his rights, so he doesn't have a relationship nor know his dad. And I wouldn't change anything.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Brittany. And, I know from our previous conversation that that is not where your experience with trafficking ended. You were also a victim of trafficking as an adult. It didn't end for you when you were a child there. You were involved in bringing down a sex trafficker here recently in the past couple years that resulted in one of the harshest sentences handed down in Ohio for sex trafficking. Can you tell us just a little bit about that case?
Yeah, so in that case, Stephen Gilbert was actually sentenced to the highest conviction that the state of Ohio has ever given, mandatory minimum of 172 years. I was trafficked by Stephen for almost 5 years, and not due to a lack of me trying to escape, because I did try to escape multiple times. However, I was not believed. Fortunately, April 25th of 2021, I was able to escape for the last time, and I met with Detective John Morgan of the Northeast Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force, my hero, and he was the first person in my life who ever believed me at face value. He didn't question me, why didn't I this, why didn't I that? I sat down, I gave him all the information that I had, because at that point, I knew that I had to save as much proof as I could, because every other time I escaped, nobody believed me. So I handed John over everything that I had, and he began the investigation into Stephen. He gave me a resource that I had never heard in my life. So at 31 years old, for the first time ever, I found out that there are places specifically for human trafficking survivors. And I went to a facility in Lexington, Kentucky for a year. And I got all the therapy, anger classes, boundary classes, battlefield of the mind. I accepted Jesus as Lord and Savior while I was there. I got a lot of healing, and I came back home to start prepping for trial. We went to trial April 17th of 2023, and I was on the stand for 2 days testifying against Stephen. And ultimately, at the end, he got found guilty of 37 felonies. Me and 6 other women had to take the stand and testify as victims. And that cross-examination was brutal. I had a defense attorney tell me that me crying while being raped was nothing but a conditioned response.
When we talk about human trafficking and we talk about people being under the age of 18 and we talk about some of the things that people experience, confusion about consent gets wrapped up in this, especially when we talk about the difference between the federal law and state law, and the state of Ohio is still, in certain cases, treating child victims of sex trafficking as perpetrators. So, Brittany, you shared with me some of the transcript from that trial against Stephen Gilbert when it came to jury selection. So I'm going to read part of that now related to the issue of consent. The attorney in the case asks a juror during jury selection, "What about silence? If I ask you for consent, juror number 29, to engage in a sexual act and you don't say anything, have I received your consent?" The juror responds, "I guess that would depend on my actions as well." The attorney says, "Okay, so there's other factors other than just spoken words?" And the juror responds, "Absolutely," and then adds, "No still means no." So when we're talking about consent, Kirsty, can you explain to us why that exchange doesn't paint the full picture of consent, and then talk to us about the difference between consent and coercion and the importance of age in this conversation?
Yeah, it is very, very complex, and I am really glad we're having these conversations. It's really important to slow down and unpack these issues, issue by issue, law by law. So when we talk about consent, we talk about the sexual act between two consenting people. Typically that is peer-to-peer relationships. So when we look at Ohio law, two 16-year-olds, 16, 17-year-olds can have consenting sexual relationships. That is not for profit. That is not in an exploitative way. That is peer-to-peer. So that's where consent is really important to understand, what consenting 16, 17, 18-year-olds can do. When it comes to human trafficking, we're talking about exploitation and sexual acts for profit of someone else. The law is very clear, the federal law is very clear, we're hoping the state law will catch up, that a child, a minor individual, cannot make those decisions under the age of 18. We cannot consent to provide sexual acts for profit of someone else under the age of 18. Children are inherently vulnerable. We know this, brain development, other developmental factors make children vulnerable. And unfortunately, that is what traffickers rely on. That's what traffickers exploit, is this gray zone in our rhetoric around it, and that needs to change. So there's very, very clear guidance from the law, and there's the difference.
We have a call now from John in Lima. John, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
I I guess my overall point is that, and I told the screener, I'm not a lawyer, but there's statute of limitations on everything except murder. So my point is don't wait to report. We want to get these people, right?
Thank you for sharing that comment, John. And Kirsty, I'll give you an opportunity to respond first.
Yeah, I agree. I wish that we would live in a world where if a crime is committed, that person the crime happened to can report. But as Brittany has beautifully articulated just now to us, is that when it comes to issues like rape and sexual assault, when it comes to human trafficking, if we're treating the person, the victim, as the perpetrator and as the criminal, then that prohibits people from reporting. And that is the story over and over again. As long as we treat victims as criminals, people will not report. And that is unfortunately the barrier to all of that.
Brittany, would you like to respond?
Yes, please. So I reported several times. I didn't never wait. It wasn't a matter of waiting. It was a matter of being believed. It was a matter of not being treated like the criminal in the equation. In fact, I got arrested and charged with solicitation, possessing criminal tools, trying to report my trafficker. And then my face got put on the front page of the paper with an article headlined that I had been a prostitute since I was 15 years old. And included in it says that I met with the Mahoning Valley Human Trafficking Task Force. So it wasn't a matter of waiting to report. It's a matter of the way you're treated when you do.
And we have that headline on the screen right now if you're watching on the Ohio Channel or the Idea Stream Public Media YouTube page. And I know that Brittany and the Collaborative to End Human Trafficking actually fought to have this article taken down, but it does refer to you saying that you had been involved in, quote, prostitution since the age of 15, which is, I know, something that you're both passionate about, dispelling that conversation about the criminalization of the acts of young people under the age of 18 if we were to go with the federal law, which Ohio law has not caught up. We only have a couple minutes left here, so I want to ask Kirsty now. We got an email from a audience member in Cleveland Heights, and David B., who is a therapist, is asking about what the community can do or what we can do to try and make this problem better. So Kirsty, I'll ask you, what are some things coming up in terms of your legislative agenda, if you can tell us in just under a minute or so?
Yeah, as you can imagine from this conversation, it is very important for us legislatively to have Ohio catch up to our state, our federal law. So for us in 2026, and Advocacy Day is coming up on February 3rd. That is Ohio Advocacy Day for the issue of human trafficking. It is Human Trafficking Prevention Month, so there's lots of programming going on. But we must rectify this. We need Ohio law to catch up. The other area that we're heavily focusing on is early detection. If we look at how we can prevent this from happening, we are very clear about these conditions that Brittany described, that she had in her life, that we see over and over again. So for a therapist, for a social worker, for a nurse, for law enforcement, there are things you can recognize early to help address before someone falls into the river or into the life of trafficking. So prevention is really, really important. So those are the two areas we're primarily focused on. Early screening, we know what these conditions are, and then making sure that survivors are not identified as criminals.
And I want to share two events that Kirsty had mentioned to me that are coming up on January 23rd in partnership with the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center. This is a virtual event that is open for all to attend. And then also on January 27th with Yasmin Vafa, that's an award-winning human rights attorney and co-founder and executive director of Rights for Girls, which is an organization dedicated to ending gender-based violence. So you can find out more about those on the Collaborative to End Human Trafficking website. Kirsty, what is that website?
It's www.collabtoendht.org. We have a very robust January Human Trafficking Prevention Month calendar. So anyone who's curious and wants to learn more, there will be a ton of opportunities for you to continue to engage in conversations, learn more, help raise awareness, talk about this issue in a way that helps survivors and take action.
And I want to read one final email from Stephen in response to our previous caller. Stephen writes, until we can change the culture, let's extend the statute of limitations. Kirsty, Brittany, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
To get the last word on today's topics, you can email soi@ideastream.org. Thursday, our panel shared stories from the NICU, the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, and one of our guests, Megan, talked about her daughter, Rosie, being born at 25 weeks, spending 126 days in the hospital. On Instagram, Joanne commented on a clip of Megan and Rose's story. So brave to talk about your delivery with Rosie. It helps other moms in the same situation. I enjoyed this podcast. Joanne, thank you very much for listening and sharing that encouraging note. Tomorrow on The Sound of Ideas, we will talk about the sicknesses that we're all experiencing, so make sure you stay with us for that. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thanks for keeping the conversation going. I'll see you tomorrow here on The Sound of Ideas.